Thanks, Annie, for introducing me. So my name is Michael Look. I'm the CTO and co-founder of SFL. SFL stands for Segala, Ferrante, and Look, and we just made that up, and I'll sort of get there when we get there. I'm also now a managing director at Deloitte. We got acquired about 19 days ago, exactly, in fact. So this is hot off the press. My background is in sciences. I did a undergrad in physics, applied maths master's, and then my PhD at Brown. 9 years ago, I graduated in particle physics, and then worked a few years at Intel before co-founding SFL. And I'll sort of talk about sort of my experiences and journey through that whole period of time. And happy to be interrupted for questions and all that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to cover sort of three main areas. It's thinking about what I learned from academia that I sort of brought into industry and what was useful, sort of experiences that I got in industry, and then starting my own company. And a lot of that is just my personal opinion. I would say that the first thing you should take away is just don't listen to me. This is my personal opinion, and I think that if you guys like think critically about what you're want to do, and if it disagrees with everything I say, then please disregard all this stuff. It's just what I believe in, what's happened to me in my past, right? It's just one person on the internet. So with that aside, I think the three main takeaways that I'm going to have flash up front is that being inquisitive, always continue to strive learning. Like you guys are grad students or postdocs, some of you, I think that keep that mentality of growing yourself and trying to understand everything. And that doesn't have to be in your job. It can be in your life and your hobbies, your family. I think just being curious and being engaged is probably one of the things that I really encourage other people to do and to be. And I think that's one of the things that really helps you in your career anyway. The second thing I will hit on is being problem solvers, being able to understand something yourself and being able to figure out the solution, how to learn about, research the topic, figure out what's been done in the past, try something, fail, try something again. Try and do that yourself. Ask for help when you have to, is one of the other second key thing that I want you guys to take away. And the last thing is being efficient. So as students, and as you transition into industry, I think it's more and more a situation where you get a ton of different noise that gets thrown at you. A lot of meetings get put on your schedules, a lot of requests get made. 99% of the time, they're just pointless. When your manager assigns you 100 tasks, 5 of them are probably things he really cares about, and 3 of them are probably really important. And figuring out which 3 to make sure that you do, and which 5 you make sure that you do to lay your higher ups, is I think one of the things that will help everyone just avoid the chaos that is the real world, right? You get stuck in your problem sets, you get stuck in your classes, do this, do that, but really in the real world, there's no clean solution. And I think being efficient at what you do will make your life so much better in terms of your work-life balance, being productive, being efficient, and all that stuff. So, okay, those are the 3 main takeaways. Hopefully, I'll hit on them with some anecdotes and stories. Okay, so from academia, so my background is hopefully like you guys. I did a couple years for my bachelor's in Imperial in physics, a year at Cambridge for my applied master's, and then 5 years at Brown between 2008 and 2013, where I learned a lot of physics courses, right? You can think about mechanics, relativity, quantum field theory, string theory, all that, from the low level electronic stuff to the high level grand unified theory stuff, right? And all that's great, all that's amazing and really useful and really fun to learn about. And hopefully you guys are going through this and maybe have been through this already. That period of time, 5, 6, 7 years or however long your PhD lasts, are categorized by the first couple of years you research and you learn. The 2 or 3 years after that is really geared towards finding your feet, finding out what problems you want to do, and where you want to play in the field. And then years 4 and 5 are really where you start doing something useful, right? It takes a long time to get to the point where you can do something useful, and you don't realize it until you get to year 4 or 5 that the stuff you're doing in year 1, 2, and 3 are just just kind of basic stuff, right? That's a lot of how life is in industry, and there's a lot of startup time before you get productive, and I think that's also something that you should take away. But okay, so that's what I learned. And what I really took away and what was actually useful in later life, I think, is how to solve problems, right? Like I don't really use mechanics day to day now. I don't really use quantum field theory. Like none of that stuff really is important, right? But figuring out how I learn, I'm a visual learner. I love like YouTube videos and all that stuff. I love to like just understand what's out there. Figuring out how you learn best, how you tackle problems, and how you problem solve, I think is one of the things that you guys should just figure out how to do in these years. And yeah, that's going to be one of the prime skills you take into the next thing you do if you move into industry, or I assume if you move into academia as well. Okay, so I'm sort of blissing through this, but how I solve problems at least is these 9 steps. So the first thing you have to really think about is the issue worth solving? So grad students, you get given a problem set, you have to do it, right? You have to do it, you get a grade. In the real world, you get given, like I said, 100 problems, only 5 of which are really worth doing, right? Figuring out what those 5 are, trying to define them, trying to understand them, figuring out what's been done in the past, think critically about trying solutions and like, does this work, does this not? And then asking for help sparingly, because I think being proactive and trying to solve problems yourself buys you a lot of credibility with people you ask, right? There's always going to be people who've been there in the company longer, people who know more than you. Just asking for help is definitely useful, but you don't want to overdo it, and you obviously learn more if you try and struggle through it, right? So what I love when as an employer now is people who can try and think critically themselves and understand the problem, like they try a couple things, but they don't waste time. Like if they're struggling on a problem for like 2, 3, 4 days, like that doesn't really make sense if someone can give you a 10-minute answer for the solution, right? So there's a fine balance between when to ask for help and when you waste other people's time. And that's a very fine line, and somewhere where it like varies industry to industry and varies from like what do you do to what you do, right? Because some problems take years to solve rather than what industry is typically days to weeks, right? So finding that line, I think, is one of the things that you guys will probably look into in the first like couple months. And one of the main things you do is as you orient yourselves in industry. And then the last thing I'll mention here is that presenting your findings, like if you're thinking about working in industry, it's really getting visibility for your results is key. Like it can be just your manager maybe, and if your manager is a great advocate for you, that's perfectly fine. But if no one sees your results, then they basically don't mean anything. They don't matter, right? And that's just the way things are, right? So being an advocate for yourself and finding like how to speak for yourself and how to present well is really, really useful as a skill. And hopefully you guys are developing that as you go. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, just learning how to solve problems, learning how to fail and keep improving. And the other thing I'll mention is that your grades are only as important as your first job. Like after you get that first offer letter, like it just falls away. So if you have bad grades and like had a couple, they don't matter at all. You don't want to put a GPA on them. And then the last thing I'll put on this little section is that I find that the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's not to say that I'm not supremely lucky in how I find myself. It's just that I think it's a necessary but not sufficient requirement, that the harder you work, the more opportunities you have. I think that's the key about everything. All right. So hopefully into the bulk of the talk and where things start to diverge a little bit from your guys' experiences. So I worked at Intel, Intel, the computer chip company. We were designing next gen and next gen computer chips. And I think back from 5 years ago, it's still like the ones that are coming out now, which is kind of crazy. Intel's a big company. There are about 100,000 people. I used to live in Oregon, and that campus alone had 20,000 people, 20,000 people just working on building computer chips. They had like designers, optimizers, HR, PR people, like all this, like every type of profession that you guys can probably apply to, like a microcosm of the world in a company. And their goal was mainly like 90% of the company was mainly geared towards designing computer chips and like selling computer chips. And their whole mission statement was trying to change the world with technology, right? These kind of mission statements are ubiquitous in the industry. It's kind of trying to align yourself with something you believe in, and that works for some people. But okay. So how are computer chips built? I just want to walk through a little bit of the steps and where I sort of fit in. So if you think about like just a normal microprocessor, a CPU, that takes roughly 10,000 different steps to build. From you have like a 12-inch wafer of silicon, you polish it down completely flat, then you etch it, then you fill it with like gold and different metals, then you polish it again, you dope it with different chemicals, you bake it in the oven at certain temperatures, and you do that all again, and you do this 10,000 steps. And it's the sort of limits of where we are is about the limits of like physical material sciences. So right now we're at the capacity, we're at like the precision of etching at roughly, I think the gate is 5 nanometers. That's 50 atoms in diameter is like how thick we're etching, and it's like a couple atoms here and there, and everything breaks down. So there's a huge margin of errors. And my role at Intel was to figure out where in the 10,000 steps where things breaking down and how you correct them. So you can imagine things like raising the oven temperature by a degree or half a degree, or like making sure you polish the wafer down like 35 seconds rather than 36 seconds. That kind of analysis was really my day-to-day life. Okay, so that was my job, and that was what I was meant to be doing. And what I found in the 2.5 years I worked there was, I think, similar to what I found in my PhD, but just a bit faster. So the first 6 months, I would say, is just learning. Like there's nothing. Oh, sorry. So first you have to get hired, and I'll get back to that. But the first 6 months is learning, and I was told on the first day that it took 6 months to be at all productive. Like they don't count my productivity until like 6 months from now. That obviously varies from industry to industry, but there is some grace period of people accept that as a new hire, you guys have to learn the ropes of how things are done, like all that stuff. In that period, it's very useful to figure out what your priorities are, who to talk to, and what you're trying to do, right? And what's important, what's not important. Trying to be as efficient there as possible. Roughly around 6 to 12 months, you just basically found your feet and getting more and more independence in your job. 12, 24 months, I think you're trying to now like start doing something like actually useful for the groups. And then 24 months, you're like, up the ladder and hierarchy and all that stuff. So that's really what I found in industry, and I think it's commonplace elsewhere, is what you should sort of like anticipate moving into the field. And I'll add here that when you start, I think it's important to find like a social group. As with anything, like the first couple of weeks, as with your onboarding with different people, like meeting people, like this is going to be the place where you spend 80% of your working hours. Like you should find people you enjoy working with. You should find intelligent people, hang out with them, learn from them, just have fun. Like a lot of people I like see online saying that, you should never make friends with colleagues and that kind of stuff. And I don't ascribe to it, because I think that that's just a miserable way of living. Yeah, sure, some people will like try to be out for themselves and all that, but like in general, everyone's like a nice person and trying to just get along, right? The other thing I'll mention especially is that HR works for the company, and not you. So if you're trying to like have an issue with anything, just keep in mind that HR is the company's friend trying to protect the company, and not like at all your advocate. Again, just a fact of life. Okay, so moving into, I think, what you guys hopefully are here to hear about is how do we get hired, right? So I want to take a step back and basically just say that you guys are coming out of Brown and PhDs and all that stuff. You guys have a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential, and I think you need to think about what do you want to do rather than the other way around. It's like, it's not like the world is your oyster at this point, and I think that thinking critically about what you really want to do with your life is probably more important than just like applying and spamming everything. That's like, oh, cool, it's Google, let's do that. Yeah, so thinking critically about what you want to do is probably what I would say is the big thing, and then just go and try and do it. In terms of tips, fix your resume. Spelling errors for sure are terrible. Like that would automatically, in my book at least, rule you out. Do things that put things that are relevant. A lot of the research stuff is not honestly that relevant. I mean, it sounds cool on paper. As a person that looks through resumes, it's just not that useful. Like I'm more curious about what would I say? I guess the end results a lot of the times, and then also like some of the algorithms are important and useful that are overlapping with what happens in industry, but you don't like put in like niche things about like what I did when I was applying for stuff, like my research. Like looking back at it, I think that the niche stuff about research is fun to put down, but it's not really meaningful to anyone, right? If someone doesn't know your research area and you put down a term that is not in common parlance, then there's no point just putting it down at all. The people who read the resumes are typically like people who read thousands of resumes, and that's their entire job. So you can imagine like it's not really that like it's hard to make sure that they understand what you're trying to write. Okay, then in terms of getting jobs and getting applications and getting interviews even, the easiest way is through word of mouth and job fairs. If you go to the Brown job fairs, and I assume there's one this semester, there's definitely one when I went in the summer. Like going in person, putting your resume down, you will get a callback. Like that's like the most surefire way that I know of getting like the first round interview, right? The second thing is probably word of mouth. Getting a referral into the company is huge. Knowing people that work there and getting direct access to the hiring manager and putting that your resume in their hand will almost certainly get you a first interview. Like companies love that stuff. Then you can go into like the more direct like spamming of LinkedIn, conferences and networking place. Direct apply, it's a bit of a black box. A lot of the time when I was applying, it was just you never heard back. Like I've sent dozens, hundreds when I was applying for jobs, just never heard back. Maybe it's changed, but especially in big companies, it's like a crapshoot of whether you ever hear back, right? Headhunters, if you put the right credentials on LinkedIn, people will come to you. Which is nice. I've heard it work a couple times. Just keep in mind that the headhunters are out for themselves in that they get paid for the hire. And so they will put you in every position that they see. So it might not necessarily be the ones you want to look for. It will just be everything, right? And then you might go through tons of interviews that don't make sense for you. So again, something to look out for. But I've seen people being like headhunted successfully, and honestly, some of our employees have been poached by headhunters. So it definitely works. And then the last thing you should do is study for the interview. Hopefully everyone already does this, but Glassdoor, even Reddit apparently is what I've heard, and then YouTube has tons of videos on how to or what to study for. So look at the questions, look at the format. If they don't have something posted, if you're going for a smaller company, just ask the recruitment person of like what's typically there. They'll give you like a sense of like the questions and all that stuff. So definitely study for the interview, because if you don't and someone else does, they'll pick someone else, right? It's just competition. Okay, and then what are interviews like? So if you guys are going through interviews, these are the ones that I know about. There might be a few more. A lot of the times they do like a background check, culture fit. They ask you questions about, a time you did that or a time you did this, that kind of thing, how you would handle situations. A lot of that, as long as you sound reasonable and don't not ask about it, like this is just a normal first pass screen. Whiteboard problem solving is probably more in the tech space where we do like coding on the board and all that stuff. Again, study for that. Then live challenges are typical like coding use cases, breaking down problems. Take-home projects is what we do as a company. It's definitely very big in tech. So something to look out for and to study for. In terms of like getting help and all that stuff, like the take-home from my perspective is you can get as much help as you want. Like I don't really care if you Google it, if you like ask friends. Like if you can somehow manage to solve the problem with all the things at your disposal, like you're okay, right? You'll get to the next round. And the next round will weed out if you can actually do it in person. Like, yeah, I would make use of all the tools that you have available, right? Like that's why it's take home and not a live challenge. Although on the converse side, live challenges take a lot more time to grade because someone has to sit there. So if you think about it from the employer side, it's sort of like a trade-off. And then last thing is questions of personal experience. So being able to make sure that you can talk about everything you put in your resume, at least at a high level, is definitely something you can be caught out. Like sometimes there's like questions about, oh, can you speak about this particular tool or when you used it, right? Just make sure that everything on your resume can at least spout a sentence or two about it. Okay, then moving into sort of expectations. Yeah, so research process, look at Glassdoor, ask the recruitment team. I'm thinking as I look in industry, the typical turnaround period of like your application to hire is about 1 to 3 months as like the average. It takes a few weeks for them to like process your resume. It takes a few weeks from interview to interview. People delay all the time, but yeah, 1 to 3 months is probably the average. And then after you get hired, depending on the company, you can delay it. So if you want to take a break, like if you apply now and you want to take a break in the summer, sure. Like big companies will absorb that time like all day long. So I took 9 months off after being hired, after my PhD, just to faff around, and I traveled a bit and got married actually. But yeah, so make use of that time. I mean, you don't want to just. It's nice to have a thing that's like set 9 months from now, and you can just play around for the next, right? Especially as someone like myself who's been in academia for like 20 years before that without a break, right? It's just nice to have that time. The other thing is compensation ranges. The job that you apply for, there's going to be a range. Like every single job out there has a range that they are willing to pay. You can definitely negotiate between that range, but I have definitely seen, and ourselves have definitely been subject to, if you go like too crazy, you will price yourself out. And you got to be very careful how you do that negotiation. A lot of the online stuff says, oh yeah, don't care, like negotiate, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is they retract the offer. So I would be very careful about how you negotiate, who you negotiate with, and just be like, you can be firm about it, right? You can say, is this offer negotiable? Like, what is the ranges? Like, and then move forwards and like have an idea of what you're worth, and definitely Google the salary ranges that are typical. But yeah, just be careful with like being overly aggressive about negotiations, at least from an employer side of the day. It just rubs like there are people on the other side too, especially for small companies with limited budget. Yeah, just be careful because those people are the people you typically end up working with very closely as well. And so it has a a longer term thing. Big companies, then maybe sure, it's not that big a deal. Okay, I'm talking a lot, but I guess that's how it is. Yeah, and then I wanted to end this section, I think, with my favorite quote from one of my professors during my master's was that there are no stupid questions, only stupid people. I just wanted to slip that in somewhere. But I think that summarizes like, I think asking for help is fine, right? I think you should ask for help when you need it, but don't don't overdo it. And I think finding information, yeah, I think it's just one of the avenues that you should look into, and be inquisitive and be curious and be engaged. I think it just shows cases that you guys want to learn. And I think as PhDs and postdocs and all that stuff, I think it is one of the things that separates you guys, right, from the crowd. Okay, what's next? Oh yeah, so let's say that's the interview, and like you get the interview and you get hired, and that's all great. Like being successful in industry, I think, is the next step, right? Like let's say you get a job, and what I've found in people being successful was like really a couple persona types, and there are many more, but the ones I saw were that some people really like to just solve really cool problems. They're very engaged with just understanding how things work, breaking things down, fixing things, like tinkerers, right? And we have tons of those, and I'm mostly one of that as well. Being really invested in solving problems for the sake of solving them, right? The next type are believers in doing something that matters. So if you are a type of person that wants to really believe in the cause of the company, so for Intel it was building technology, like bringing technology to the world to enable, like, I can't remember what the tagline was, enable like technology and enable people to do more, right? So at SFL, what our tagline was, discover more, but I think it's really geared towards doing more with data and trying to solve real problems with data-driven approaches. That was our core mission, and that's what we believed in. And I think some people like love that, and I think that drives like your engagement and drives what you want to do. Yeah, and I think it's like a successful driving mechanism for people. The next thing is team players and people who want to work with intelligent people. Like I have a ton of fun just being with intelligent people. If that's something important to you, I think that's something you should think about when applying to the jobs. Like ask to speak with different members of the team that you work on. Ask to speak with, like, we always say yes to that kind of thing because I think it's important to understand the culture that you're going to get into. Some cultures are better than the others. Like Amazon has a notoriously bad culture, Google has a notoriously good culture. Like you can just get a sense from Glassdoor and all these other things of like what it's like to work there and whether or not that's something important to you. And then the last thing is like self-driving learners I put on there. So I saw a lot of people that really just love to learn about everything and like love to learn about how the world works. And those people always seem to be, one of the most successful people out there because they would know everything at that point, right? They just want to know because they want to know. And then, yeah, I think being curious is one of the things that I love being. Thinking critically about everything that you do and being interested in it, learning new things, and you guys are all again in your academic careers, like you guys should all love learning, right? Having this growth mindset of, we will do better tomorrow, right? And have fun. And then the last one is to engage with everyone. So trying to learn something from everyone, I think that's one of the things that is important, at least to me, is like even like every single person that you meet will have something interesting you can learn from them. And I think that's just how the world is. But there's like a million people you can meet in your first day at work or first day at anywhere. So I think, yeah, be careful where you spend time just because time is limited and time is finite. All right. That's a lot of, okay. Yeah, so going into like the being efficient. So just to hammer it home a little bit, there's never a clear answer or solution. It's never a clean cut, or almost never a clean cut of like, this is better than that. There's always some trade-off. In industry, for sure, they don't really care about the last decimal point. Like when we build stuff and when we build models for our clients, like they don't care that it's 1% more accurate. They care about if people will adopt it and if people understand how to use it, right? So trying to figure out where that cutoff is, and it's typically 80-20, where you do 20% of like the core work and you get 80% of the results, and then you just cut it off there and you move on to the next thing, is better in some sense than to just try and keep hammering down for the next incremental gain. As a perfectionist, sometimes it hurts for sure to think like that. And there are areas where like perfection is important. So this is just a generalization, but mostly in industry, it's at least what I've seen is that people will only care about like, the first big bucket, and then incremental gains are, the not as cool, right? And that goes back to being efficient about learning to solve a problem, finding where that trade-off should be, and where you want to spend your time. And if you want to spend your time like perfecting something Zen-like, I think that's perfectly legit, right? Like, I'm not saying that you should just do everything like this just because it's like financially more better. But yeah, I think this is just what people typically prioritize in industry. Yeah, and yeah, so doing what is necessary, I think, is just the takeaway from this point, right? Doing it to the best of your ability. Just because you're doing it efficiently and doing 80% of it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be the best quality 80% that you give, right? Okay. And then just a summary, yeah, be inquisitive, be efficient, and learn to present well. Again, being able to advocate for your results, advocate for yourself, is probably one of the best skills to have. if you get opportunities to practice at conferences, opportunities to practice in front of your groups, like when I was at Brown, we used to do like weekly presentations to our like subgroups. Like that was like, just keep doing that. Like you can only get better, get feedback from people, just keep getting better at learning to present, because being able to speak in front of crowds, and I hate it, but it's a really useful skill to just be able to get your point across. Even if your results suck, you can present it well and people will come along with you. Like it's like that. If my slides suck and I present well, then I'm okay, but hopefully not both. All right. Okay, 34 minutes. I don't know if I should pause here if there's questions or comments before I move into starting companies, but I keep going.
I just had a quick question about what you said with asking, you can ask the recruitment team about how the interview is going to go, or like what to expect during the interview. My first question is, did I get that right? You can actually ask the company what to expect.
Yeah, for sure. I
Okay.
mean, they will tell you, ask them exactly what the structure is like, how many rounds there are,
Mm-hmm.
what it takes to get cleared, like even the requirements for what the passing criteria are, like how it's graded, that kind of thing. Like I would be surprised if they said no, and the big companies
Okay.
will definitely say yes,
Mm-hmm.
because they have
Okay,
like
yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
they have like a cheat sheet of like, here are the 5 things they need to hit. Like just,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it's like secret sauce, but yeah, you can always ask.
Okay, great. Yeah, my second question was how to approach that, like how to phrase things. You're not just trying to like take the easy way out or make it seem like that. And you just answered that. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just ask like, yeah, you want to understand the process a little bit better so you can prepare for
Mm-hmm.
it. Like people love, like the fact that you're preparing for it is not a bad thing, right? Like they love
Mm-hmm.
people who want to do well and to be invested.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't,
Thank you.
then maybe you should apply elsewhere. All right, anything else? Okay, founding a company. Again, I'm going to say this at the start. You probably shouldn't do it the way we did it. We sort of stumbled into it, and I'll sort of walk us through it. So SFL Scientific is a data science consulting company. We build AI data-driven solutions. We were founded 7 years ago now, gosh. We have our first real employee that wasn't the co-founders, so not SFNL, in 2018, so 3 years after we signed on the paperwork. We're completely self-funded in that there's no like investment and seed funding, although now we've been acquired, so I guess that's false. Specialized in data science, building AI solutions, and I'll go over a little bit of that. And our primary focus is in healthcare and the federal space. We have 58 employees before the acquisition, which was insane to me. Like we were 3 guys from Brown, actually. We started a company like, oh, like, yes, like we'll start a company someday. We all went down, like working in the industry for 2 years. And then my friend Daniel got his green card. It's like, let's just start the company. And then basically that's how it began. We were at a barbecue and it's like, okay. Yeah, so that's really how it started. Think about, people you want to hang out with. And we sort of built it. I'll go into a bit more detail. So as a company, what we do is we tackle data-driven problems, anything from unstructured data, so like just stuff in a box, to tabular data, temporal data, image, text, relationship, graphs, that kind of thing. I won't go into any of that because I could tell data science all day. In terms of use cases, you can think about things like forecasting, right? Like forecasting COVID was one of them. Image location, image segmentation, and all this stuff. So trying to figure out in the healthcare space, like which part of the image is MRI is cancer, which part is usable tissue, or in manufacturing, we do stuff like, is there a defect in the pipe that's being made? In text analytics, we do things like extracting the key terms from documents. So who is the buyer and the seller? So names are pretty easy to extract, but trying to figure out the semantics between the buyer and the seller is a bit more complicated because there's some nuance in the context. Okay, so that's all what we do. So how we ended up starting a company is pretty roundabout. But first, the timeline. So the first 2 years, we were slowly building our client base and our reputation. We took contracts that didn't make sense financially, but that made sense on getting logos onto our website. Our first couple contracts, we went on Upwork. I think it's called, Upwork. It's basically an internet job posting. Like companies would post jobs of like, can you do this data science project, right? Submit a bid, submit a proposal. We did that for a year or two, attacking the ones that had the best logos. We got like Staples, we got, I don't know, a couple of big Goodyear, a couple of big brands that would just, they had 10K to spend, or some guy had 10K to spend, and a manager had 10K to spend. We'd get that on paper, just do it basically at a loss for salaries, and just collect logos to put on our page, right? Because that builds credibility. One of the big transition points was around 2018 when we hired our first employee. Hiring a first employee is like a weird situation where you have no idea what you're doing, and this employee now has applied to you thinking that you know what you're doing. You've never had an employee before. I've never managed before. And we're in a situation where we're just sort of bootstrapping the whole thing. So figuring out in all that ambiguity, like the problem solving, like I think that's where I came in from, is really key, because you got to keep an open mind. You got to keep learning about all this like crazy stuff that you never thought about. Like, how do you even hire someone? How do you pay a contract? Like, how do you pay their taxes, right? All this stuff you never really like dream about is now like, okay, now we have a first employee. It's legit. We're not like, taking $5,000 from an Upwork contract. Okay, so we worked out all that. Very complicated. We actually just asked one of our friends who had started a company and had documents of like contracts and legal stuff. And then there's also websites where you can get a lot of this like templates. We took a lot of that and just like ran with it. The next couple of years were pretty good. We had steady growth, went to like 10, 20 people. 10, 20 people is around another transition point. It's where you have a substantial like presence, right? Like 10, 20 people is like a legit, like, 5 people is still a startup. 10, 20 people is where you're like getting some traction. We hit COVID at around 20, 25 people, and then plateaued there for a little bit, took a little bit of time. And then in the last 2 years, we went insane. And we kind of lucked out with the market in AI. Like 5, 6 years ago, there was no real even data science AI masters and PhDs, which meant that if you were a science PhD, you were basically the top of the game already, right? So we kind of like jumped the queue, and we sort of rode the AI wave of like, oh, this is all cool and everyone wants to do it. So we built it like that. So as I said, a lot of it's a bit lucky from our part, and timing them, like you are where you are. So don't try to reproduce this exact formula. It's probably the way. Okay, so as I mentioned, we sort of started haphazardly. We found something that we did well. So we were all working as like data scientists, data analysts, that kind of thing, analytics. We thought that we could do it well. We chose a services company because there was no upstart, like front costs. You think about like building a product, you have to like have capital, have funding. Like service company, you get a contract, you get paid, right? It's that easy. The second step, so first thing, you figure out what to do. We wanted to do it fast, and we were good at data analysis. So services company, data science. Figure out a company name and tagline. This was a huge argument about how to like, and still people are complaining about our name because it's 3 letters and a huge fight about the order of the letters, huge fight about the tagline. Amazing. This is the funnest part of the whole company building experience, is like that period of time where you get to like just play arbitrarily, because it's on paper, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like no one else is calling your company this. You're the CTO of, I'm the CTO of 0 people. Like it's just made up things, right? But again, that's how it happened. And then you go to legalzoom.com, which still exists, and you pay $500 and you can register your company. And then you do all the stuff that I told you in last slide, and you sell for profit. That's exactly what we did. So what are the details going into this? So as I mentioned, we started a service company because it's convenient. We had backgrounds in physics. Both my co-founders and I physics PhDs at Brown, actually. We were good at analyzing data. Data science was coming up. That's what we did. Data science service company. The tagline, company name, huge conversations, huge debate. A lot of vanity, a lot of like fighting. I definitely didn't want to be the middle character, because that's the worst, right? That's the first to the last. It's like, those are the most important. So my co-founder, other Mike, chose the first. I went to last. Calling shotgun on CEO, CTO, and all that stuff. So Mike really wanted to be the business front. So he naturally went to CEO. He called it first, shotgun, and then I called CTO second. And then the last one got stuck with a CDO, which is Chief Data Officer. But I think the takeaway from that is like, you got to align it a little bit to what you really want to do a couple years from now. Like I really wanted to be the technology person. Like I don't care about business, and I honestly still don't too much. Like I care really about technology, and I really enjoy learning about, how data science applies and how to play with it, right? So just figuring that out and what you want to do is probably a big thing. And then yeah, go to Leo, file the paperwork. That was relatively easy, surprisingly. Although I would recommend, if you're really doing this legit and you think that you can make it, that you get a proper lawyer and spend a couple more $100, because how we did it and how you could have done it tax-wise, if you ever sell in 5-10 years, is hugely different. Just put out there. And then you self-profit. Okay, I think that was, yeah. So that was how we did it. But building a company is definitely meandering. Like I would never recommend trying to follow our formula. And this is just for a service company, a completely different game for, people who get seed funding and all that stuff. Like I have no idea about that world. It's completely different. I read a statistic about building a company by yourself versus others. Sorry. It's like something ridiculous of companies that have only one founder fail in the first 3 years. I don't know what the statistic is, but it's why Dropbox has two founders. It's because at some point the guy who started Dropbox tried to get seed funding, and all the investors said no because there's only one founder, and like these typically fail. Find another founder. He found someone from Stanford Ph.D. program, picked him off the street, and then said, okay, now we have two. Now we've got money, and they're now both multi-billionaires, as you guys know. Okay, so pick co-founders you trust. It definitely strains the friendship for sure that we have. I think having definite roles of like who does what, like Mike was the business front, right? Mine was the technology side and delivery, right? Having that clear division of labor is very, very useful. And the fact that we were friends means that I can trust him with, not screwing me over with the business side, right? Like I think that's a benefit from that side. So dividing up responsibilities, checking out the competition. If you're looking at starting your own company, it's always good to have some competition. It means that there's like some interest from other people, but too much is like the field is saturated. So be a bit careful there. And if you see the competition and you can see something you do better, then that's also fine, right? Like when we started, there were 3 or 4 bigger players that just didn't, like they were big players and they had big names like associated with them, but they just didn't seem to be doing what we could do or we thought we could do. Right? And then be okay with realizing that you don't know the answers yet. I think one of the big things that I figured out in industry and like starting a company is that no one has any idea what they're really doing. They're just making it up as they go. Some people do it better and some people do it worse. And I think just being okay with the fact that people don't know is good. Start small and iterate. We didn't even quit our jobs for the first 1.5 years, I think. Just make sure that it makes sense. Like try and de-risk it as much as possible. Like obviously, the more work you put in it, the more likely it is to succeed. But be sensible with what you want to do, and focus on what's important and work hard. Right? Like we could have boiled the ocean of like setting up like the perfect way of doing projects, the perfect way of doing this or that. We just had to get good enough to get the first thing done, so that you get the next thing, and then you get the next thing, and it builds. Right? It's very hard. Like I would love to have spent instead, or I'm getting to spend it now that we've been acquired, now that we have funding, is to set up the company like exactly with all the standards and the processes that I would have loved to have done at the beginning. But it's just, first of all, it's a learning experience of like iterating and all that stuff. But secondly, it's like it doesn't make sense at that time, right? Like you have to make sense at the particular time. And finding like purpose, committed, and curious. And I think that's all sense stuff. Yeah, and I think the other thing I took away from like scaling the company is to stick to the overall vision of what you want to do, like, and what you enjoy, right? We could have gone down so many different alleys. Like we could have built products. We could have, like, by the time we were 20 people, we could have built products. We could have done this or that, but we wanted to be data science consulting. So doing that and doing that well was our first primary focus. And I think that laid us in good stead to succeed, right? But obviously we had to be flexible in that, COVID hit, we had to take different contracts and different contract types, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, just think about it carefully. Okay, let me see how far I go. All right, I'm almost at the end. Perfect. All right, so what I've learned. So there are inflection points in building a company. So when there's 0 people, that's like no stakes, right? We've got legal Zoom. No one's quit their job yet. That's fine. When we first quit our job, Mike and I, when we started, like 18 months in, it was nerve-wracking, right? Because now we have like to pay ourselves, and we paid ourselves less than we were making in industry when we quit. Right? So we had enough contracts to like sort of just squeak by. So it was like nerve-wracking. Then the first employee was a huge inflection point. Then 10, when it's like, okay, we're trying to get legit. And then 50 was where we hit the start of this year, is the other big inflection point that I didn't realize existed until we hit it, is where you start to lose track of the people that work for you. It's like, I don't know everyone's names. Well, right now I do, but it's starting to get like, I haven't talked to every single person more than once in the last month, right? And then it's starting to get where you need to trust the next level, right? And so keeping an eye out when you get to roughly like 20, 30 people, an eye out on how to scale and how to keep everyone happy becomes a bigger and bigger deal. And it takes a lot of problem solving, takes a lot of prioritizing, and just working things out as you go. Okay, I think I have 3 more slides. Perfect. Okay, so going back to how to get hired from like now that we founded SFL and what we do. Again, think about what you want to do. Think about who you want to do it for and who you want to do it with. Very important. There's no like, okay, I'm going to solve your resume problem. Sure, that's going to get you in like the first round, but that's not going to get you hired. Like you can look up all these like, everything online that says fix a resume. Here's what you do to prepare, like do all that stuff. Like there's no golden bullet in that sense. Silver bullet, I guess it is. And then study for the interview. Yeah. And then what we look for is relevant resumes. It's very obvious if a resume is relevant or not based on how much jargon there is sometimes. Like sometimes you overdo the jargon. Like it doesn't make sense to put it in, like you shouldn't. Like put what makes sense. What we prioritize is being able to think flexibly and quickly. I think that's mainly a consulting track because you have to be engaged on client calls and all that stuff. People that can scale. So I think for us, one of the important things is like your trajectory. It's quite obvious who will be proactive, who will follow up on tasks, who you don't need to micromanage in the first week or 2 of hiring. And we've tried to put that in our interview process, which is not perfect. But like being the type of people to being proactive about what you need to do. Like, I don't know what I need to do. I need to find out what I need to do. Okay, someone gave me a task. I've done it. I'm gonna give the results back and not just sit on it, right? Those are the people that I love and I will promote all day long. And the people who are really interested in what we do, and that's it, right? If people aren't interested, they're really out the door. There's no point, right? There's no point at that point. If you're not interested in like the stuff that we do, and you're just there to get a paycheck, for me, it's like, okay, I can make money off of you, but there's no way for you to grow to be better. And like, I always have to like look out. And it's just not worth it. And then I think a couple tips for everyone out there. Everyone has their own agenda and motives and personal life and all that stuff. And it's not nefarious by any means. 99.9% of people are really nice out there, but they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about, how do I get my career promotion? How do I get the thing, right? So it's just be wary of that. It's like, if you can understand what they're looking for, like if they're looking for their own, like for us, it's like, for us, we have client issues, right? So let's say a client hires us to do something. Like if we succeed, they succeed, right? Your goals are aligned. Figuring out and how to help them will make your life so much easier because then they promote you. It's like, oh, these guys are great because I'm now promoted, right? And getting that context of like what other people need and helping them do that is really helpful for yourself. And I think that's one of the takeaways. It's like everyone has their own motives and agendas. It's great. If you understand them and you help them, they will help you back. They will like promote you. You'll build your own thing. Like just I think that building the community at work and with people you work with It sounds a little bit bad on the slide, but I think really it's like a positive thing of like, making sure that you understand and helping where it makes sense for them. Right? And the other thing for you guys is that you guys should really think about enjoying your work. It's going to be a lot of your time in life. You guys have opportunities. You guys are, Brown graduates will be. Like you guys have the opportunity to do something that you really like. And if you get sucked into something you don't, just apply somewhere else, right? Like I am not offended by people who jump from SFL if they want to do something different, right? Like sometimes it just doesn't line up. Like they're perfectly nice people. Like I like them personally, and a lot of people who've left, I still keep in contact with. It's just where people are in life. Okay, last slide, I think, of content. Yeah, so just summarizing everything. Be problem solvers, efficient, and inquisitive. I think that's really just my takeaway for life and being successful in industry. And then learn from your own mistakes, figuring out, what you're doing that you could be doing better, and listen to me, don't listen to me, just sort of figure it out by yourself, I guess. And that's I think it. 5 minutes left.